Hello and welcome to OPA GCSE Sociology, and today we're going to be looking at what are secondary sources. So just for your do now, you can see on the right hand side some key concepts there. So we've got large sample, longitudinal study, structured questionnaire and so forth. I just want you to distinguish which one of those would you associate with quantitative or qualitative approaches. Okay, so these are all characteristics of either one of those approaches. Or another way of putting it, which one would you associate with a positivist approach and which one would you associate with a qualitative approach? Okay, so you're just going to pause the video maybe just for 5 minutes, write out a list of those and then just write next to them whether they're more likely to be quantitative or qualitative. Right, so just going over those now and looking at which ones are quantitative, which ones are qualitative. So as we said in the past throughout this unit, generally speaking, a quantitative approach is associated with the scientific approach. So they're very interested in data and numbers and correlations. And they're also associated with the structuralist approach. So that's generally the functionalists, the Marxists, some cases the feminists, New Right. They're very much those traditional theoretical approaches. And they're really interested in data that's reliable, so it's quite easy to repeat. And because of that, they're interested in things like having structured questionnaires and structured interviews where there's an experiments where there's little room for maneuver. Okay, it's very uniform and standardized what the questions are and how they're ordered. And they like a large sample as well. They're looking for it to be representative. On the flip side of that, we've got a qualitative approach, okay, and that is very much associated with an anti-scientific approach. It's very much associated with social action theory, so sort of micro sociology as opposed to macro. And because they're really interested in moving away from science and data, they're interested in validity. So thinking of immersing yourself in that world through really detailed, in-depth answers. That's the best way to understand it in their mind. So the only way that's really achievable is through very small samples and through sort of unstructured approaches. So that might be unstructured interviews where the ordering of the question wording is not the same necessarily, but it might be as well through observations, through ethnographics, longitudinal studies. So that's just a lay of the land in terms of those two approaches. Right, so just as a primary source is talking about a sociologist getting their hands dirty and conducting their own research, this is kind of the opposite. This refers to any data that has been collected by other sociologists or from a variety of alternative sources. So you might just want to write a definition down of that. Just give yourself a couple of minutes to pause the video. Right, so what are the benefits of using this approach? So firstly, it's cost effective to source. For me, in my lessons, whenever I get any data, I can very easily just refer to the ONS, so Office of National Statistics, the census, a government department, something like that, okay? All I have to do is go on the internet and get that. It's very hard to get social research for free, but secondary sources are available through means like that. It'd be a lot cheaper than me going out and finding out about the UK, doing the research myself. It's also good for triangulation. So you could use a qualitative approach. You could do maybe an observation and follow it up with some data from a census or a department's research. Or it might be that you use, I don't know, structured questionnaires and follow that up with some more diary entries or something like that. Okay, it also acts just as a good example of how to go about research. It's good practice. It's also often, if you're looking at lots of reports here. It's very good at looking at social change. So you're able to reflect on perhaps a census document from 10 years ago, maybe even 100 years ago, and compare it to today, see what trends have changed. Things like, you know, are people getting married? Has crime increased? What are people's beliefs? Things like that. Equally, it's relatively easy to access, okay? All you have to do is really go online at a click of a button. It is there available. So maybe just note down a few of these strengths. Excellent, right. So equally, just going to note down a few examples of some secondary sources that you might refer to. So you've got things like the Office of National Statistics, the Census, which refers to sort of population data, Crime Survey for England. You might look at social trends in government departments like the Department for Health and Social Care, or the Department for Housing, or the Department for, I don't know, for education, whatever it may be. You've got historical documents there, so we refer to like old census data. Some of it's life history as well, so it might be a diary entry you look at. And then it can even be something like a newspaper report. I'll just get a few of those down as an example. So we said earlier, there's a lot of strengths associated with using secondary sources, but there's an element of caution we should take here. Okay, if you're doing history, you understand this as well. Not all sources are reliable. Not all of them can be trusted. Okay, and many are biased. And they can be biased in the form of selecting certain data or maybe changing the language of certain things. So to try and review that, a bit like how you would review primary research with a pilot study or a peer review, you're going to conduct a critical review. You're going to look at it yourself. Okay, you might put a team together just to look at certain sources to see how credible they are. And these are some of the examples I want you to get down of bias in secondary sources. So a newspaper company have agendas based on their own opinions and motivations. They are also motivated by making profits, sometimes at the expense of the truth. So for example, tax avoidance. Many newspapers want to highlight benefit fraud over tax avoidance. Okay, so think a large corporation, they might lose out profits through having to pay more tax. So they might pick on a government that proposes to raise taxes, or might try to avoid their tax avoidance and their issues that they're causing by highlighting something like benefit fraud or another crime. So it's just an example here in the past of how newspapers have really, really sort of manipulated secondary sources for their own agendas. But it's not just clear, blatant bias through that means. It's also national government statistics. They can often be manipulated to make the government to look good, or to really simplify the context. So a government might emphasize low unemployment rates to make poverty look like a low, to make poverty look low and like it's not an issue in a country. So yes, unemployment rates might be low, but it might not show the full picture of poverty in that country. It might not actually include a reflection on how poor wages are, so people in working poverty. And you can see that in the image above. So data might not always give you the full picture. It might actually be selective for that reason. And then finally, we've got this idea that often there is sort of hidden crime. So crime reports do not always reflect the true nature of crime, only what is reported. This is referred to as dark figure crimes, those who are not caught or prosecuted. For example, drug use is most likely to be a lot higher than presented by the government. And that's something we saw looking at Thurrock. Okay, we thought as a class, that it was going to be a big area in terms of drug consumption. But if you look at the actual reporting, it's quite low. So it might be that that reporting only reflects the tip of the iceberg, and that the reality of unreported drug users are essentially the full picture on top of those reported. So it's really this idea that it's not really showing the full picture of drug abuse.